By the way, this is a brand new quarter. I'm pretty sure you're aware of that, but if you're not, this is a brand new quarter, and this is our first time to have this class. And I'll say, as I try to remember to say at the beginning of every quarter, you're in here this morning, but if you change your mind next week and you want to go to another class, you will not hurt my feelings. So go where you want to go, even if you just want to sort of look around, shop around, see what's being taught in some of the other classes, because there's always something interesting going on. But this is a class on the wisdom literature, the poetry, the 5 books of poetry. And of course, we can cover all 5 in one quarter, because in this quarter we have 14 Sundays. If we'd had 13 Sundays, it wouldn't have been enough. But I looked on the calendar and we've got 14 Sundays, so I think we can make it. Now, Judy, you're not supposed to eat those. That's... Well, I would... Well, good. See, she loves it so much she's eating it right up. This is sort of an introductory worksheet. If you were in a class on Job 7 years ago, you might remember some of this information. I'm sure you remember all the stuff you studied 7 years ago. I hope I can remember it, because I forgot to make myself a cheat sheet, so I'm going to be... But number one, we're talking about Job this morning. Only the good Lord knows who wrote the book of Job. The date of the writing is also unknown to us, but there is evidence that it was written during the days of anybody want to venture a guess for that? During the days of the patriarchs. Who were the patriarchs? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Noah, all the old guys in ancient times before the law. Before the law. The Bible sort of divides history into 3 historical sections. The days of the patriarchs, from the creation up until Moses gets the law on Mount Sinai, and then the days of the law of Moses from Sinai up until the time of Christ, and now we are in what we call the Christian age. Since the church has been established in the early part of the 1st century, we are in the Christian age and will remain in the Christian age until the Lord returns the final time. Number 2, internal evidence for an early writing of the book includes the fact that there is no direct reference to any part of the Mosaic law or law of Moses. In other words, if Job's situation had taken place after the law had been given on Sinai, there probably would be some references to the law, the priesthood, the prophetic writings, or something along those lines, but there are no references to any of those such things. Especially the priesthood. There's no reference to priesthood, and I bring out priesthood especially because in the 1st chapter and in the last chapter, we see Job acting as a priest. He makes sacrifices, sin offerings for his children in the 1st chapter, and God directs Job to make offerings for his friends who've been so goofy in the last chapter. As a matter of fact, the book introduces us to Job as one who makes sacrificial offerings, sin offerings to God on behalf of his children, and I got that reference there, but you can also put down chapter 42. Job's wealth. His wealth is also reported to the reader in an agrarian fashion. What's agrarian mean? Farming. When you live on the basis of farming, and actually all of us do. Anybody eat? Never talk bad about a farmer with your mouth full. But their culture was much more agrarian. They were much closer to the land and crops than we are, and that's how his wealth is accounted for in the 1st chapter. How many cows he had, how many camels he had, how many donkeys he had, that kind of thing. His wealth is also reported to the reader in an agrarian fashion, as was done in the days of the patriarchs. Scholars have noted that the language of Job also supports an early date, since some of its linguistic element points to the more archaic forms of Hebrew. Job could very well be among the oldest written materials to be added to the canon of the New Testament. What do we mean by canon? I only use that word because I want us to be familiar with it. C-A-N-N-O-N is a big gun. But the word canon means accepted. And there are writings from the ancient times that the ancients knew were of God, and so they were accepted, and that means canonized. So when you hear the word canon or canonized with regard to the writings of the scriptures, that's what that means. Nobody voted on them. They didn't have to figure it out. They just knew this is from Moses, this is from Joshua, whatever it is, and they would include those books and in the canon. Let's see. Number 3, Job belongs to the portion of the Bible referred to as poetry or wisdom literature. Either poetry or wisdom literature. That's number 3. You know, if I'm going through this kind of fast, well, I am, because I want us to get to the text of Job. Number 4, the prophet Ezekiel mentions Job with particular implication to his righteous character in 14 and 20. James is the only other biblical writer mentioning Job, calling attention to his patience in chapter 5:11. The fact that these two inspired writers reference the work speaks volumes of its place within the Word of God. It's also been speculated by some, falsely so or inaccurately so, or not accidentally, wrongly so, I guess I just say wrong, that Job was simply some kind of a play, and even if it is written as a play, it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Job is spoken of as a historic character by Ezekiel and James, not simply as somebody whose story was made up to make a point. Number 5, the fact that the book of Job details with the question of pain and suffering marks it as a very practical work to be included early among inspired writings. The New Testament book of James also addresses this issue and is a very early edition, giving the years there 45 to 49 for the writing of the book of James. Number 6, in dealing with the problems of pain and suffering and the existence of evil in the world, Job does not offer explanations or reasons for such difficulties as much, how did I write that? As much as it points us to faith in God for the outcome. Why is there evil and suffering in the world? Well, we would look back to Genesis chapter 3, where Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit and sin was introduced into the world. But why does it happen to you and me today? And the bottom line is, you don't know. When we read Job, we find out that there's a story behind why Job suffered, but Job never knew that. And it's of interest to me that even when we get to the end of the book, God never explains to Job why he went through all that. All that was necessary for Job was to maintain his faith in God. That's what he did, and he turned out a whole lot better in the end than he was in the beginning. Number 7, as with the study of every other biblical book, the student must be careful to read everything in context. Context. What's that guy said? A text without a context is a pretext. I've always liked that. Keep everything in its context. Everything I say, I want to be kept in context, because you could take anything I say and pull it out of context and make me say some weird and crazy stuff. So, and you like that too. Number 8, back page. Passages of special interest are subjectively chosen, but some of mine are. What do I mean when I say subjectively? According to my feelings, my opinion, what I think. You might not think these are interesting, but I think they're interesting. Chapter 1, verse 6 and 2:1, where it said that Satan came among the sons of God. I want to know how that works out, but God doesn't explain it to me. He doesn't say this is what was happening. He just says this is what happened. 1:5, 42, 7-9 tell us that Job acted as a priest for his children and his friends. Mentioned that a little while ago. Chapter 19, verse 25, where Job expresses faith in God as his Redeemer. We normally think of Jesus as our Redeemer, and Jesus had not been presented yet, not in the flesh. But Job saw God as his Redeemer. 26:7 tells us that the ancients who worshiped God knew that the earth hung on nothing, contrary to popular but false ideas of pagan cultures. What were some of the ideas of ancient cultures about what supported the earth? Anybody study that, know that? Big turtle, yeah. A great big turtle, but a turtle. Pillars, just pillars. Because when you look around in the world, you see things that support other things, and so you naturally think, okay, the earth's got to be supported by something. It must be pillars. I don't know who came up with the idea of a turtle, but those were ancient ideas, and some of those persist to this day. But Job made the observation God hung it on nothing. Job had never circled the planet. He had never, what do we call that? In circumnavigate? Well, that's what you do on the ocean, but when you're outside, when you're orbiting, that's the word I'm looking for. You can see, oh, there's nothing up here for it to hang on. There's nothing below it for it to be supported by. Not everybody knew that, but Job knew it. 31:1 is where Job states, interestingly, that he has made a covenant with his eyes, not to gaze upon a virgin to lust after her. I just thought that's an interesting idea, to make a covenant with your eyes. What's a covenant? It's a contract, agreement. So, okay, it's like you're talking to your own eyes. You got to do that kind of thing. Keep your flesh in line. 40:15-24, where God describes behemoth to Job, which sounds like a sauropod dinosaur. The sauropods, that's the Apatosaurus, the Diplodocus, the great big, anybody go see the new Jurassic Park movie? It's pretty cool. But the great big huge long-necked dinosaurs, those were the sauropods. And when you read Job's description, or God's description rather, of the behemoth, because God is explaining it to Job, and the whole point of this, we'll get to that later, but Job's trying to explain to Job, listen, Job, I'm God and you're not. And he didn't mean that as an affront or to put Job down. He's just saying this is the way it is. You ever have to explain something like that to your children? I'm sorry, sweetheart, but you need to we're going to the doctor and you need to get this shot. Just because you don't want it, just because you think I hate you to make you get a shot, just because you think the doctor is your enemy, you're still going to get the shot. And I can't explain everything to you that there's a reason behind this, but trust me, I'm your mom, I'm your dad. So that's the same thing God is doing with Behemoth. He says to Job, take a look at Behemoth. Look at this guy. He's chief of my ways. And when he describes Behemoth, as you can read for yourself in the text, he's not talking about an elephant or a rhinoceros or any big animal that we know existing today. He's talking about an animal that we know existed in the past because we found their remains, and Job was familiar with the animal. Otherwise, it would have been pointless for God to describe the animal to Job. Same thing with Leviathan in the next part. Leviathan, a huge creature that lived in the ocean and even snorted fire. We've always thought of fire-breathing dragons coming up in this world as, oh, those are just things of myth and legend. Anybody ever heard of the bombardier beetle? Look it up when you go home. Don't pull out your phone, look it up right now because we're in Bible class. But look it up when you go home. The bombardier beetle is a tiny little bug. He's not even an inch long. But when he is attacked or when he's afraid, he shoots out from a nozzle in his body steam. I forget what temperature. It's over 200 degrees. And how he does that is he's got a little reservoir in his body, and he's got two other reservoirs with the things necessary to mix in that reservoir, and he mixes that stuff together, and it shoots out and injures or scares away any creature that's attacking him. The bombardier beetle. Now, if God can do that with a little beetle that we can see today, what could he have done with a creature the size of the behemoth or any of the other larger dinosaurs? He could make a fire-breathing dragon if he wanted to. And besides, dragons, what do you think people would have called a dinosaur if they would have seen it 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago? would have called it a dragon. That's the word we have before the word dinosaur was invented. And how many cultures in the world have dragon legends? You think about it, almost every culture. The cultures we might think about the quickest are the Oriental cultures, the Asians, Japanese and Chinese dragons. But you go across Europe, well, everybody's seen the picture of King George, or not King George, St. George killing the dragon. And that's not the only dragon legend in Europe. They just proliferate all across the world. And in every culture, there are legends of ancient creatures that they call dragons that we would today call dinosaurs. So, good evidence from Job that the dinosaurs were alive when Job was alive, and God described them to him. How else, by the way, how else would the writer of Job know how to describe the behemoth? Because we read the description of the behemoth and we say, well, that's an apatosaurus. Yeah, they had to see it. They had to know. Number 9, I divide the book as follows, and this is just how I break it down. It's really simple. Let's get into the text of Job, and I will sort of give you this breakdown. Well, I won't sort of. I'll give you my breakdown. In the first part, the first few verses, and I don't know why, I said I divide the book as follows, and then I said chapter 1, verse 1, and then I didn't put an ending verse. It's obviously 12 because the next section starts at 13. But that's sort of the introduction that tells us what's going on. It establishes the fact that Job was what kind of a man? He was a righteous man. There was no one more upright than Job. And it says in verse 6, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. So the sons of God, whoever they are, and there's no explanation for that, but whoever the sons of God are, they're presenting themselves before God. And when they come, Satan is among them. And it says, the Lord said to Satan, there's verse 7, from where do you come? And Satan answered the Lord and said, from roaming about on the earth and walking around on it. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There's no one like him in the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. Satan answered the Lord, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge about him and his house and all that he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But put forth your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. And then the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not put forth your hand on him. So Satan departed from the presence of the Lord. What do the next passages tell us? Tell us how Job lost everything in a material way, but not just materially. What else did he lose? Lost his family, his children anyway. Kept his wife. What was his wife going to say to him? Why do you keep your integrity? Curse God and die. Now she'll say that later after he's lost his health as well. But this is what's happening. Why is Job suffering? Is Job suffering because he's done evil? Job is suffering because he's a good guy, and it's his righteousness that has drawn the attention of the devil. And that's why he's suffering. Now, do people ever suffer because they're unrighteous? Well, yeah, we see that all the time. But God is showing us it doesn't have to be that way. In other words, in John's Gospel, chapter 9, there was a man who was blind, and he was blind from birth. Do you remember the question that the apostles asked Jesus? Now, these are the apostles, the guys that had been with Jesus, and they're asking Jesus a question about this blind guy, blind from birth. What did they ask him? Who sinned so that this guy is born blind? What's their assumption? Yeah, he's blind, must be his fault, must be his parents' fault, it's got to be somebody's fault. And we still make those kind of assumptions today. We see somebody down in hard times and we think, oh, they've sinned, they've done something wrong. Not necessarily. Maybe so, but not necessarily. In other words, I think the entire point of the book of Job, one of the main points is, don't go making presuppositions about the situations you are in or other people are in. Just put your faith in God. That if things are going great, go to God with it. If things are going horrible, go to God with it. That's the basis of faith, really. Faith isn't just something for when times are hard. Faith is something for when times are as good as they can get. Faith is a way of life. So, Job loses all of his stuff and his children, and then he loses his health in chapter 2 because the devil comes back and Satan has not cursed God yet. And he says, well, you just let me have his health, and if I take his health away, then he'll curse you. And God says, okay, you can take his health, but what can Satan not do according to God? Can't take his life. Now that's, in the first chapter, God limits Satan's power with Job. He says, you can take all of his stuff, but don't touch him personally. Okay, and that's what Satan does. He's limited by what God says, because God is sovereign. Satan is not. God is everywhere and knows everything. Satan is not that powerful. He's not like that. Sometimes we get to thinking he is, but he's not. He doesn't have near the power that God has. So when Satan comes back and he's ineffective in causing Job to curse God, he said, well, but you just let me have his body, and if I can have his body and make him sick and suffer, he'll curse you. And God says, all right, take his body, don't take his life. So God is limiting Satan again. So Satan causes Job to be sick and have open sores on his body from the top of his head to the sole of his foot, and he's sitting in ashes, scraping himself with a piece of broken pottery. And that's when his wife says to him in chapter 2, verse 9, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. What's her point of view? What's the wife's point of view? Yeah, it's God's fault. Why should you trust him? This is all his fault. Curse him and die. Don't wait for the outcome of this. It's kind of like, of course, by the time you get into high school, you understand what has to happen when you get on a sports team. I like to use this illustration because it works so well. Nobody signs up to play basketball, goes to see the coach, and then the coach says, here's a box of donuts and a gallon of chocolate milk. Go sit down and we'll play some games next week. What's coach do? He says, get your shorts on, we're going to run. I don't want to run, coach. Shut up, sit down. No, stand up, go run. Matter of fact, run farther. If you're going to backtalk me, you run farther. Here, we're going to run these hurdles. We're going to do these, one of those, everybody has a different name for them. When you line up at one end of the court and you go to the foul line, you go back and you go to the half court and you go. Wind sprints, yeah, that's not what, there's another name for them that's a lot worse than wind sprints. Suicides, okay, yeah, that's what I'm getting at. If a coach wants to make you into a good athlete, he's not going to make your life easy. That's not what coaching is all about. Parents, how do you spoil a child? Yeah, pamper them. Let them do what they want. You let your child do what they want. What do you need to do to bring up somebody who's going to be a good citizen? They got to mow grass. They got to wash dishes. They got to make their bed. They got to take a bath daily, perhaps more often than that. You've got criteria for training your children a certain way, and God is exactly the same way. And you don't look for the short term. I don't want to run these wind sprints today. You look for the long term. Okay, I want to be part of a winning team, and the only way to do that is to train myself, and I've got to give myself over to this if I'm going to be any better. And that's the same way it was with Job. Same way it is with you, same way it is with me. God is working in our lives in ways we don't understand to make us better. And that's what we need desperately. Billy? Okay. It's our tendency, because we believe God's in control, and if he's in control and something bad's happening to me, he must have either caused it to happen to me or he's letting it happen to me. And so we'll put the blame on him. But I like to think of it, that's why I come back to the coach idea. I like to think of it in terms of a coach who's training us to be better than who and what we are. What does Paul say about suffering in Romans chapter 8 and verse 28? Anybody recall that? You can look it up. That's not cheating. This is a Bible class. Romans 8:28. The Lord causes all things to work together for what? For good. Now, when he says all things, he's obviously including things that we would consider not good, because, well, duh, good things work for good. They're already good. But what about things that aren't good? That's what Paul's talking about there. The Lord causes all things, even things that we might say are not good, to work together for good. Yes, those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. Don't forget that part. And that's who Job was. God is working together for his good. So, we've got the situation here where Job is suffering and he's not cursing God at this point. And then it says in chapter 2 and verse 11, Job's 3 friends heard of all the adversity that had come upon him, and they came each one from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, shortest guy in the Bible, by the way, right there. Just think about it for a minute. Bildad the Shuhite, okay. And Zophar the Naamathite. So Zophar, so good. And they made an appointment together to come to sympathize with him and to comfort him. How long did they stay silent? You're giggling because you know what's coming. For 7 days, these guys sat with Job and they kept their mouths shut. That's the best thing they could have done. Somebody's hurting, sometimes the best thing you can do is just go sit quietly with them. What happened when they opened their mouth? They began to accuse Job. Did they know what was going on? They didn't have a clue. They did not have a clue, but they thought they knew, just like the apostles in John chapter 9. They thought they knew somebody must have sinned, either this guy or his parents must have sinned, that he was born blind. Those were the only 2 conclusions they had. And so these guys come and they sit down with Job and they're quiet for 7 days, and then Job speaks, and they answer what Job speaks, in as much to say, you've done something wrong here. Look at chapter 4, verse 7. Remember now, whoever perished being innocent, where were the upright destroyed? According to what I have seen, those who plow iniquity and those who sow trouble harvest it. What's he saying? And Job, you must have done something bad. You're reaping what you have sown. Somewhere in the past you've sown evil and it's coming back to you right now. That's the way this works. Did Eliphaz know what was happening? Did Eliphaz know why Job was suffering? How foolish does Eliphaz look to us now, because he's speculating about something he doesn't have a clue about, and he's speculating negatively about his friend, quote unquote. Yeah, he looks just like me sometimes, sorry to say, because that's the way in physics, what does gravity do? It pulls everything, and we would use the word down. Just like there are physical laws, there are spiritual laws. And you are a person who is a physical body, but you are also a spiritual being. You have a spirit from God. Your body's made of this world. How did God make Adam? Took a handful of dirt, formed from that dirt a living being, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and Adam became a living soul. So we are made of dirt. If you die and somebody lays your body out on the ground, it's going to go back to the dust. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, that's the idea. So that's your body, but your spirit is from God. And we're in a constant battle to try to triumph over the flesh with our spirit, because our spirit knows what's right. Our spirit has a conscience and is drawing towards doing what's right. And the problem is that the same way it is in physics, it's the same way it is in spirituality. We tend to go down unless we're actively working to go upwards. And so spiritually, we can start coming up with bad spiritual ideas that go down rather than come up. And that's what these guys are doing. They're talking about spiritual things, talking about morality, talking about sin, but they're making accusations, or they have no foundation. Chapter, 8. After Eliphaz speaks, Job defends himself again, and then we come back to chapter 8. Look what he says in verse 4. This is Bildad the Shuhite. If your sons sinned against him, then he delivered them into the power of their transgression. What is Bildad saying? Yes. Do you like people talking about your children in a negative way like this? So Eliphaz said, Job, you've sinned. Bildad comes along when Job defends himself against him being the sinner, and he says, well, must have been your kids. Must have been your children did evil. He's really meddling now. See, this is why this happens to Job as the dad rather than Job's wife as the mother, because she would have gone up and killed the guy right there, I think. So does Bildad know what he's talking about? He didn't have a clue. He doesn't have a clue. And this is the way it goes all through the book of Job, and we are provided with a wealth of back and forths between Job and these three guys, and it's all speculation. It's all just total speaking out where they don't know what's happened. They don't have a clue. They're just going back and forth, and accusations are flying left and right. And it's just exactly the way it is today. Just exactly. People talk about whether or not the Bible is relevant. Well, duh. When you pick up this book, that's one of the most ancient books in all the library of the Bible, and it's talking about exactly the same stuff that's going on today, yeah, it's pretty relevant. Right. 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 Seek him and his passion to restore you back to the righteous state. You put a person on display and you just wait and see what happens. No matter who's the president, somebody's going to be throwing stuff at him. It's always been that way. You put somebody in the office, people are going to start shooting, throwing, casting aspersions, all that good stuff. What's already the concern about the new appointee to the Supreme Court? Well, no matter who it is, people are going to start making accusations about him. And let's face it, who's perfect? Jesus, yeah. The rich young ruler came to Jesus and he said, "Good master, what can I do to inherit eternal life?" And what did Jesus say to him? "Why do you call me good?" Now, Jesus knew he was good because he was God, but he knew that this guy didn't believe him to be the Son of God, so he's making a point with him. Job isn't good in the sense that he's never sinned, but in the eyes of God, he's righteous because he's kept his faith in God, and that's what God considers to be righteousness. He counts that faith as righteousness. That's what Romans chapter 4 tells us that God does. So in God's eyes, Job was a righteous man. So the accusations against him are totally unfounded. And this back and forth goes on until we get to chapter 32. And then there's a young man who enters the scene named Elihu, and he rebukes Job and these other guys, but what he really spends his time doing is vindicating God. God's not the one at fault here. And let's do a little air clearing here. Is there anyone without sin, ancient or present? The only one would be Jesus. That's why he came to sacrifice himself, because he's the only one without sin who could do that. Everyone is under sin, even Job. Technically speaking, he's under sin. What is the penalty for sin? Death. So even in all the things that Job suffered, he never got what he really deserved because he is a sinner just like the rest of us. But God doesn't want death. He doesn't want separation. That's why he sent Jesus, because he says, this is the situation. You guys have sinned and you put yourself in a circumstance where you're going to die. As God, he doesn't have any choice but to give a just verdict for our sin. Okay. Right. What I'm getting at, though, is if someone were to look at this and say, well, Job was totally righteous, so he didn't deserve any of that. Well, we know underlying his righteousness was his sin. God made him righteous, but there was a degree of sin there because nobody's been without sin. And so for him to suffer is not unjust or wrong. He's suffering, and he already deserves to die because of his sin. And God is allowing this to happen because, well, Job is his servant, and he's going to make a point with Job. And he's going to restore Job when this is all over. It's back to the idea of, I don't want to run, but my coach is making me run. My legs hurt, my lungs hurt, my heart hurts, everything runs, but my coach makes me run. I really hate this. Oh boy, look, we've won the championship. How did we do this? We must really be good ball players in spite of our coach. No, because of your coach. Because of your coach. And that's what God does with us. So when Elihu gets finished vindicating God, then God speaks up. And what does God do when he begins to speak? This is chapter 38. I counted the questions, but I forgot to write down, I counted them decades ago. I think it was 72 questions. But you can go through yourself and you can look at the questions that God asks Job. And let's just start with the beginning in chapter 38 with the questions God puts to Job. Well, 38:1. The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, by the way, when you, in Oklahoma, what do we know about whirlwinds? Those things are awesome. And you feel small when they come. And you go out on your porch and watch them as long as you know they're not coming your way, because you just don't want to miss that display of power, and you are just speechless at that kind of a presence. I watched a guy who videoed one. They were in Florida. It must have been in Miami, someplace like that, because it looked like there was a long strip of land and then a long strip of water and then a long strip of land, a long strip of water, and palm trees all over the place. And it looked like southern Miami. But they're filming off the balcony of their hotel or whatever building they're in, and they're seeing this, looks like a little water spout off in the distance. And it's getting closer, and as it gets closer, it's building and building and building, and then it crosses over one of those pieces of land, and it starts sucking stuff up. And there's all kinds of stuff, and the wife starts screaming and like, get out of here. And the husband's saying, I'm coming, honey, and he just keeps filming. And she's screaming, and she comes back up several, you get out of here. But you see this huge, what was a small water spout that's now become a tornado when it's ripping across land and water and sucking stuff up, and it goes right past, and it's like, whoa, wow, that's awesome. You go out and you watch a thunderstorm, and the lightning's in the sky, or you feel one of those quakes. Anybody felt the earthquakes that we've had here the last couple of years? It's like there's power, and when it's unleashed and when we're present, we become speechless, and that's what God is doing with Job here. The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, and he says, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Any of these guys know what they were talking about besides Elihu? None of them knew. Gird up your loins like a man, and I'll ask you, and you instruct me. What's it mean to gird up your loins? But okay, yeah, I like that. Put your big boy pants on. In ancient days, they wore the robes, and we've all seen the pictures of the long robes. But if you wanted to work, you couldn't have that robe flopping around. So you would get something, and you would tie that thing up, gird up your loins, so you could go to work. And God is saying to Job, let's go to work. You need to learn something here, boy. That, if God was Southern, that's what he would have said. But so he says in chapter 38, verse 4, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Now, what would Job say to that? So, I don't even know. Tell me if you have understanding. Who set its measurement, since you know? Or who stretched the line on it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and the sons of God shouted for joy? There's another reference, by the way, to the sons of God. Who enclosed the sea with doors when bursting forth, and it went out from the womb? Why does the sea only come up so far? Why doesn't it just wash right over the land? Boundaries. Who set those boundaries? You realize how narrow those boundaries are, how huge the oceans are, but how narrow the boundaries are. And the tide comes up and it goes back out, but it's really very small. How is it so small? How come the moon doesn't move back and forth? I mean, you just go through all these questions about the planets, the constellations, about the animals, stuff we have no clue about still today. And God is asking Job, and what's he going to answer to every one? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. 72 times. I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know. I wasn't there. What's God doing? He's making the same point that we do as parents sometime. Who brought you into this world? Oh, I guess you did. What's that mean? That means shut up, sit down, or go do what I told you, or whatever. Because that's the authority of a parent. Now, everybody knows parents can abuse their power, but if a parent's being a good parent, there's times in a child's life when you got to do that. You got to say, because I said so. This is what's right. And that's what Job is learning here. Because God said so. That's what this is all about, all these questions. And then at the end, look what happens at the end. Chapter 42, Job answered, the Lord said, I know that you can do all things, and no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have declared that which I did not understand. Things too wonderful for me I did not know. Hear now, and I will speak. I will ask you, and you instruct me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you. Therefore I retract, and I repent in dust and ashes. That was Job's state of mind when he realized his relationship to God. Verse 7, it came about after the Lord had spoken these words to Job that the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, my wrath is kindled against you and against your two friends, because you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Therefore take for yourselves 7 bulls and 7 rams, and go to my servant Job and offer up a burnt offering for yourselves, and my servant Job will pray for you, for I will accept him, so that I may not do with you according to your folly, because you've not spoken of me what's right, as my servant Job has. So that's what they did, and God accepted them through Job. God could have destroyed those guys, but he didn't. He said, here's what I want you to do for your salvation, for your good. Chapter 42, verse 10 and following says how God restored everything to Job that he had lost. What's the purpose of this book being in the Bible? What do you think? Because there's no verse that says this is why this book is in the Bible. We got to figure it out. We got to come up with an opinion. What is your opinion about why this book is in the Bible?
It shows God's control, acknowledge him, and the righteousness to him. And regardless of what happens to us, he can restore, bring back full measure of whatever.
Okay. When something bad happens to you, what's the first thing you want to know? Why? Why has this happened to me? Why am I sick? Why do I have cancer? Why does my car break down? Why can't I pay my bills? How come my kids won't do what I want them to do? On and on we go with all these questions, and the bottom line is there aren't going to be answers for everything. That's just the way it is. What are you going to do about it? You're going to go to God. Lord, I don't understand this. I don't know why I'm sick. I don't know why my car won't work. I don't know why I'm so frustrated. I don't know why I'm depressed. Help me out, Lord, with this, and what's God going to do? He's going to say, I'm going to help you. You got some learning to do. We got some training to go on here, so we're going to work on this. Is it time for the bell? What's that? Should have. Oh, there's 2 bells. I shouldn't have said anything. But Lord willing, we might address Job a little bit next week. But what's after Job? Psalms. See, Job is the first of the wisdom literature. You just got to remember the first thing you got to do in life is get a job or get a Job. And when you get a job, you're so happy about getting the job that you just sing about it. So Job, Psalms. And then if you've got a job, you got to quit singing at some point. You got to get smart about your job, and that's what Proverbs is for. And it goes on like that. We'll talk about this more later, but people need to come in. So I'll shut up. Thank you for being in here this morning.